Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Zara.
I'm Emma.
Over the weekend, Hezbollah's longtime leader, Hassan Nasrallah, was killed by an Israeli airstrike in Lebanon. It marks a significant shift in the region, with Nasrallah having been in power for over 30 years. In today's deep dive, we'll explain how we got here and what it means for the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah moving forward. Over the weekend, the leader of Hezbollah, his name was Hassan Nasrallah, was killed in Lebanon by an Israeli airstrike. In a statement, the group said Nasrallah had been killed in a strike on its central headquarters in the centre of Beirut, Lebanon's capital. He was killed alongside a number of other high-ranking members of Hezbollah.
Okay, so before we go into what happened on the weekend, the impacts of that, why it was significant, I think it's really important to take a step back, particularly when stories like this develop. A lot of us can feel left behind. Maybe we're missing pieces of the puzzle. So I wanted to ask you to give us a little bit of background on Hezbollah before we go any further.
Yeah, so Hezbollah, the word itself, is derived from the Arabic term Hizb-Allah, which translates roughly to Party of God. It was established after Israel's invasion of Lebanon in 1982, as the country itself was grappling with a civil war. Hezbollah is based in Lebanon and receives funding and training from Iran. Australia, alongside a lot of other Western nations, lists Hezbollah as a terrorist organisation, and its manifesto specifically calls for the destruction of Israel.
And just to clarify, Lebanon as a country is governed by a parliamentary democracy of elected officials, despite Hezbollah's presence in the region, right?
Yeah, exactly. So while there are members of parliament who do represent Hezbollah, it is not the governing party, as, for example, Hamas is in Gaza. It's a different situation there. So following its invasion in the 1980s, Israel officially withdrew from Lebanon in 2000. At the time, the UN drew up what it called a provisional border that was between the two countries, and they called it the Blue Line. That blue line has been monitored by UN peacekeeping forces ever since that time. And I should say that the relationship between Israel and Hezbollah, it's a long and a checkered one, and it would take its own podcast to explain what has happened since that time to how we got to here. But for the sake of understanding these most recent events, I think that where we need to begin is on October 8th of last year, and that is the day after Hamas's attack on Israel, and it is the day that Hezbollah began firing rockets into Israel. At that time, I'm quoting directly from Hezbollah here, it declared to Hamas, "Our souls are with you, our history and our guns and our rockets are with you." Now, since that time, the 8th of October last year, there have been escalating cross-border attacks between Israel and Hezbollah. They've been continuing for much of a year. We are now approaching that same timeline a year later. But they have certainly escalated in the past few weeks.
Okay, so Hezbollah began launching rockets on October 8, 2023. We're now in October, nearly a year later, as you mentioned. So what has the escalation looked like?
So for a while, it was much of the same. I said it was those rockets and then Israel was retaliating and sending rockets back into Lebanon. But it kind of looked that same way for the past 11 months. And then last month, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that his cabinet had updated its war objectives to include returning the residents of the north securely to their homes. What he is referring to there is the residents in the north of Israel who have been displaced due to those rockets that we were talking about earlier. And so, according to the Netanyahu government, an objective of the war was now to return those residents home. And that was essentially saying that they were going to escalate their war against Hezbollah.
Okay, so we knew that this escalation was going to be imminent. What form has that taken? How have things changed?
So, I mean, it's taken a few different forms. The first was just a day after the Israeli government updated those war objectives, and that was when we saw those pager and walkie-talkie attacks happen across Lebanon. So if you weren't familiar with that story, the first of the two attacks was targeting pages that were used by Hezbollah members. According to the group, those pages all exploded at once. We understand that there were a couple of beeps and then they exploded. That attack appeared to be targeting members of the group, as I said, who owned those pages. And through all of the reporting, it appears they had obtained those pages in an effort to not have their communications tracked by Israel. Lebanon's health ministry said that after that attack, 9 people, including some Hezbollah members, were killed in the attack and then thousands more were injured. It was then just a day later that walkie-talkies exploded across Lebanon, killing 20 people, also including members of the group, and injuring hundreds of others. And so those were the 2 recent significant escalations. And from there, it's really grown. It was just days later after those 2 attacks that the Israeli military launched a campaign of airstrikes. It said we're also targeting Hezbollah members. Those strikes killed more than 500 people in what became the deadliest day in Lebanon since 2006. The IDF said that those strikes were, quote, proactive and extensive, and that they were targeting both members of Hezbollah but also bases, so the infrastructure of Hezbollah. At the time, authorities didn't really confirm how many of those killed had been members of Hezbollah, but what we did see happen was that Hezbollah really increased the number of daily rockets that they were firing into Israel.
Okay, so we've seen this significant intensifying of tensions. Firstly, with those really targeted attacks in Lebanon, you mentioned the pagers and the walkie-talkies, to those more widespread, deadlier strikes across Lebanon, and then the retaliation of more rockets into Israel. So that pretty much brings us to last week. Talk me through the weekend. What happened?
So over the weekend, as I mentioned at the top, Hezbollah's leader Hassan Nasrallah was killed, and he was killed by an Israeli airstrike that hit Hezbollah's central headquarters. To give you a bit of background into Nasrallah and to, I guess, just emphasise how significant this is, he was elected as the Secretary General of Hezbollah in 1992. He was at that point aged 32. Wow. So he had held this position for over 3 decades. When he assumed the leadership, Hezbollah was growing in dominance in the south of Lebanon, but it was by no means the power that it is today. In the decades since he was appointed leader, the group had grown its influence not just in Lebanon, but also across the Middle East more generally. We know that Hezbollah has fought alongside Syria's President Bashar al-Assad against the popular uprising back in 2011. What we also know is that Nasrallah had avoided public appearances since 2006.
Wow, that's a long time.
An incredibly long time. And I mean, he had been doing televised, events, and he had been doing all of that. But out of fear of assassination, he had not been seen publicly. And so I guess that just paints a picture as to how significant it is that he was both found and targeted in this airstrike over the weekend.
And a man who spent the majority of his adult life at the helm of this group. So given the significance of Nasrallah as a senior figure in this conflict, what has the reaction been?
Well, I think as expected, the response has been very varied depending on who and where it is coming from. So if we start with the US and Israel, who of course are close allies to one another, they both describe Nasrallah as a terrorist. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said, and I'm quoting directly here, he said, "We have settled accounts with someone who was responsible for the murder of countless Israelis and many nationals of other countries, including hundreds of Americans and dozens of French." Nasrallah was not just another terrorist, he was the terrorist. US President Joe Biden said in a statement following the announcement of Nasrallah's death that his death from an Israeli airstrike is a measure of justice for his many victims, including thousands of Americans, Israeli and Lebanese civilians. And one of the points that Joe Biden made quite clear in his statement was that he believes that Nasrallah miscalculated on October 8 in beginning to send those rockets over. And that's what was really echoed by Kamala Harris in her statement as well.
You've mentioned, Zara, that Hezbollah is controlled, resourced, directed by Iran. So what has the Iranian response been?
Well, I'd say starkly different to what we saw from Israel and from the US, which is, of course, to be expected. So Iranian state media reported that Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, declared 5 days of national mourning for Nasrallah. He described Nasrallah as, quote, a path and a school of thought that would continue through Hezbollah's activities. Of significance, he said that Iran would continue its fight to confront the enemy and that Israel would face crushing blows as all regional resistance forces are ready to become involved. And I think it's important there to just explain Hezbollah is not the only proxy army that Iran has. We have also seen the Houthis in Yemen be equipped, resourced, and directed by Iran. And there is also, of course, the connection between Hamas and Iran. On the latter point, Hamas's previous political leader, Ismail Haniyeh, was killed in Iran on Iranian soil. And all of this really just shows how deep this kind of regional conflict goes. Speaking now of Lebanon, it has declared 3 days of mourning following Nasrallah's death.
So what happens from here? Obviously, we have seen the headlines for nearly a year now about concerns surrounding escalating conflict, Israel's war in Gaza, expanding, across the Middle East broadly. So what happens from here? Are we there now?
Yeah, well, I mean, in the days before Nasrallah was killed, there were already a number of nations calling for a ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah. So it was, I'd say, a very rare form of unity to see the US, Australia, Canada, the European Union, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, UK, and Qatar all come together and call for a 21-day ceasefire. And that was to, quote, conclude a diplomatic settlement that enables civilians on both sides of the border to return to their homes safely.
Wow, it's not every day you have most of the world's most powerful Western democracies joining forces with the UAE and Saudi authorities to sign a joint declaration.
Exactly. It was quite a big step. But of course, that was before what happened this weekend. Also before the weekend, the US had committed to sending forces to the region in response to what it labelled as increased tension. But all of that changed this weekend. What happens from here is unknown. In terms of Hezbollah's senior leadership, it wasn't just Nasrallah that was killed. We understand that much of the kind of senior command has been killed by Israeli forces. And that means that the group that has reigned with such power for so long is now really at the stage of having to rebuild, and what that looks like in its newest iteration, we really don't know at this stage. We also don't know where it leaves the conflict with Israel. Hezbollah and indeed Iran have committed to retaliation, but we don't know when, how, what that will look like. So we will have to wait and see. Just to bring this closer to home for a moment, over the weekend, there were a number of protests and rallies held across the country. That was to mark what's called a National Day of Action for Gaza. That was being run by the Australia-Palestine Advocacy Network. And that some of those rallies, as I said, thousands of people were in attendance. At some of those rallies, people were holding signs of either Nasrallah himself, photos of the leader who had just been killed, or of Hezbollah's own signage. And what we've seen now is quite a strong political response to the events of the weekend. From the government side, we've seen Penny Wong, our foreign minister, come out and say, we condemn any indication of support for a terrorist organisation such as Hezbollah. Not only threatens national security, but fuels fear and division in our communities. All of us, including every political leader, must stand together to reject terrorism and extremism. And then on the other side of politics, we had Peter Dutton, and he has come out and demanded that there be law changes and laws that are passed with urgency, according to him, that would see visas cancelled of people that were seen to be supporting Hezbollah over the weekend. In response, we had Home Affairs Minister Tony Burke say that he would consider refusing and cancelling visas for anyone who seeks to incite discord in Australia, and that he condemned, quote, any indication of support for a terrorist organisation.
And the Australian Federal Police have also responded since the protests. They've said that they can't arrest someone for displaying images associated with an extremist group. So the legislation doesn't exist there yet. No doubt we'll see more conversation around this over the weeks to come. Zara, thank you so much for breaking that one down for us today. An incredibly complex story, and one that no doubt will continue to develop, and we will keep you up to date here on The Daily Aus.